Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about True Romance. So in my last video, I did a ranking of Quentin Tarantino's entire filmography. For those who may have missed it, I'll make sure to link it in the description below. But one of the movies that I didn't mention, because it was a film that Tarantino didn't direct, but he did write, it was directed by the late, great Tony Scott, R.I.P., is the film True Romance, a film that I hold very near and dear to my heart. I'd go as far as to say it's one of my favorite movies ever. One of my favorite things that Tarantino's ever done. I don't know if I can quite rank it above his best movies like Inglourious Basterds, Pulp Fiction, or Kill Bill, but I do rank True Romance very highly as one of my favorite things that Tarantino has written. I think this movie is just so unbelievably fun and entertaining and energetic. It's funny, it's suspenseful, it's violent, it's romantic, it's the whole package. And I didn't get a chance to talk about it in that video, so I'm gonna talk about it now. True Romance is a film that is it's a cult classic among the Tarantino community, and it's an interesting movie to watch. Because there really hasn't been that many films that Tarantino has written that has been directed by somebody else. I mean, I do have one of them right here, actually. That is Natural Born Killers, a very controversial film with both Tarantino and Tarantino fans. In fact, my most watched video on this channel is a radio snippet that I found of Tarantino talking about his disdain for this movie.
Here's a question I have for you, too. What about Natural Born Killers did you not like that Oliver Stone did with it? Because you wrote that, right?
Yeah. Well, basically, that he rewrote my script. That's first, foremost, and kind of, you can stop right there.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
In the case of Natural Born Killers, Tarantino wanted his name taken off the film. He got a story credit in the movie because Oliver Stone rewrote the script so significantly that it doesn't really resemble that much of Tarantino's original script. I've never read his original script, but it is available to buy and check out, which I might do one of these days. But Tarantino didn't really like that. But in the case of True Romance, the film is very truthful to the script. There's only two things that are changed. The first thing that's changed in True Romance is that the movie is told in a linear way and not in the classic Tarantino non-linear storytelling, which he loves to do with so many of his movies. So in this movie, it's told in a linear fashion, and the ending is changed, and we'll get into that in a minute. But before I get into the specifics, I'll just give a brief overview of what the film is about. So True Romance focuses on Clarence Worley, who's kind of a loner, kind of a nerdy, movie Elvis obsessed individual who works at a comic book shop, and for his birthday he likes to go to the movies. And so one evening while he's going to the movies, seeing the triple feature of Street Fighter featuring the great Sonny Chiba, who would show up in Kill Bill as the legendary Hattori Hanzo. During that evening, a beautiful woman by the name of Alabama accidentally dumps popcorn onto his lap, and from there they have a great magical evening, going out for pie, talking about movies and stuff, and Clarence shows her where he works with the comic book stuff, and they end up making sweet tender love, and then after which Clarence finds out that Alabama is actually a call girl that his boss contacted to surprise him for his birthday. Now, Alabama feels very conflicted about this because she ended up developing very quickly very true romantic feelings for Clarence, and Clarence likewise. And so the next day they get married. And from there, the movie becomes a pretty insane roller coaster because Clarence needs to go get her stuff from her abusive pimp. Things go south pretty quickly. Clarence ends up killing the pimp, and his associate ends up stealing the bag that he believes has Alabama's things in it. Turns out it's about $500,000 worth of cocaine, but they both see an opportunity here to sell off this cocaine, get the money, and be able to live happily ever after with each other. And yeah, the movie is insane, tonally speaking. It's a movie that I think when it came out, a lot of people weren't really ready for. The movie didn't do well at the box office, but critically, a lot of critics really liked the movie. I think they admired how the film is just a wonderful hodgepodge of different genres kind of mixed together. As Roger Ebert would say, the movie is an explosion at the film genre factory.
Our first movie is True Romance, and this is a movie that sort of resembles an explosion down at the old movie genre factory. The screenplay by Quentin Tarantino cobbles together bits and pieces from every possible kind of male action movie and views them all through a focus of adolescent lust, macho bravado, and lurid stereotyping. The result is totally absurd and kind of fun.
Roger Ebert would also go on to say that the movie's very kind of immature and it kind of represents a teenage boy fantasy, but that the movie's undeniably a lot of fun and has a lot of energy. And that kind of goes to the basis of why I love this movie, and that is this movie is Quentin Tarantino's teenage fantasy come to life, essentially. Tarantino has said on record numerous times that the character of Clarence is his most autobiographical character to date. And it's pretty obvious to see right from the get-go, the way Clarence talks, the way he talks about Elvis, the way he talks about movies, his very colorful use of words and dialogue is very reminiscent of Quentin Tarantino. In fact, what's interesting is that when Tarantino was writing True Romance, he had an aspect of the script where Clarence was also writing his first script, which was Natural Born Killers. And so Quentin Tarantino very ambitiously had the idea of making True Romance and Natural Born Killers into one movie. We would see the one narrative of Clarence and Alabama dealing with their adventure and misadventures. And that would be paralleled through the fictional narrative of Clarence's screenplay of Natural Born Killers. But Tarantino figured out pretty quickly that that was way too much for one movie. It would end up being like 3.5 hours long or something like that. I think that would have been too much for a lot of people. So he instead separated the two. And then when he went on to go make Reservoir Dogs, and that movie made a pretty significant impact on the film circuit, a lot of movie producers came a-knocking, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to make your 2 scripts that you haven't turned into movies yet?" And he's like, "No, I want to focus on the next project. I don't want to go back." So Tarantino sold those 2 scripts. Tony Scott ended up taking True Romance, and Oliver Stone ended up taking Natural Born Killers. And so that's how Tarantino, because Tarantino he didn't want to go back. He wanted to focus on Pulp Fiction and that, which I respect. But out of all the movies that Tarantino's been kind of associated with that he didn't direct, I think there's like 3 that come to mind. So there's True Romance, there's Natural Born Killers, and there's From Dusk Till Dawn, which Tarantino co-stars in alongside George Clooney. That was directed by Robert Rodriguez. I think out of all those projects, True Romance is the best. It's the most fun. It's the most, I think it's like the best example of what makes Tarantino such a fun and exciting writer. His movies feel like movies that can only be made by somebody who loves movies more than anything. And that's what True Romance is. This movie has, like I said, tonally, it has everything. It's got action, it's got suspense, it even has some elements of horror. I mean, that scene where Alabama has to fight off with James Gandolfini. And that's another thing before I get too off track, is we need to talk about the cast of this movie, which is one of the most stacked casts in any movie ever. So obviously you have Christian Slater, Patricia Arquette, right? You have freaking Dennis Hopper and Christopher Walken, and probably the most famous scene in this movie, as well as one of Tarantino's, it's one of his best scenes. Tarantino said it's one of his favorite things he's ever written. The very famous Sicilian scene. And then, like I mentioned, we got James Gandolfini in a very young but a super intimidating role. And that scene where he beats up Alabama is brutal and hard to watch, but the way Alabama fights back and brutally kills him, it's horrifying, but it's also cathartic, and that's a very memorable standout scene. And then other actors, we have Val Kilmer in an uncredited role as Elvis. We don't actually even see him on screen, we hear him. I assume because he worked with Tony Scott before on Top Gun, so he probably wanted to do a favor for Tony Scott. And then, of course, we got Gary Oldman as Drexel, one of my favorite movie characters ever, a white guy who thinks he's a black pimp. Gary Oldman's absolutely insane in this movie, and it just goes to show you that he's one of the most versatile actors in the history of cinema. He can literally play anything, literally, and True Romance is an excellent example of that. Who else am I missing? You got Michael Rappaport. You got freaking Brad Pitt in some great foreshadowing, because he'd work with Tarantino later on in a role known as Floyd, the wonderful stoner character who would actually go on to influence the film Pineapple Express, according to Seth Rogen, which I think is great. I'm a big fan of that movie as well. Who else? You got Tom Sizemore. You got Chris Penn, who is obviously in Reservoir Dogs. I mean, the cast in this movie is absolutely insane. And anytime they're on screen, it's a memorable moment. And so this movie, which is minus credits, just a little under 2 hours, has so many memorable moments. It's kind of crazy how much it's able to pack in, which is amazing. But yeah, so outside of the fact that the cast is fantastic, Tony Scott's direction, that's another thing we need to talk about. Tony Scott's one of those filmmakers where even if he makes a subpar movie, like not all of his movies are great, but he's made a lot of movies that I absolutely adore, like The Last Boy Scout and Enemy of the State are two great Tony Scott films that I recommend people should check out. I'm not a big fan of the movie Top Gun. I think Top Gun Maverick was way better. But Top Gun is still, like, I like the way it looks. And that's the thing. Tony Scott has a very distinct visual style that feels, I think some critics have kind of said in a derogatory way that his movies look like music videos. They do, but I like that. I love his use of lighting. He always has kind of like a sunset lighting that's kind of like an orange hue on a lot of his movies. And I love his visual storytelling. He totally gets the style of Tarantino, I think, probably more than any other filmmaker who's tried to film a Tarantino script, even more than Robert Rodriguez, who I love Robert Rodriguez, and I know he's close friends with Tarantino, but just the way Tony Scott takes Tarantino's material and the way he turns it into just a very visually pleasing, mainstream kind of poppy aesthetic is just one of the many reasons why this movie is so damn rewatchable. This is one of the most rewatchable movies of all time, in my opinion. And then outside all that, like I said, this movie is basically, it's Tarantino's teenage fantasy, where he's basically Clarence. Tarantino said it, like, this is his version of Clarence, played by Christian Slater. And his fantasy is that, I want to be caught up in a awesome, sexy romance with a gorgeous blonde female and who has an amazing personality, and I want us to get caught up in an adventure that resembles a gritty 70s grindhouse crime movie. And then we get to the ending where Tarantino originally objected to the idea of Tony Scott wanting to change the ending. Originally, Quentin Tarantino wanted Clarence to die. He wanted the movie to be kind of a tragic romantic tale. But Tony Scott, as he was reading the script and he was making the movie, he was like, you know what? I love these two characters so much that I want him to get away with it. And Tarantino objected to this. He's like, Tony, you don't make those kind of movies. Like, don't do the sellout Hollywood ending, is kind of what Tarantino was saying. And
Tony was able to combat me very passionately on his own part and say, Quentin, I am not doing it to make it a Hollywood movie. I am not doing it to try to turn it into something it's not. I want to do it. It's not for commercial reasons. It's not for Hollywood reasons. I want to do it because I love these two kids and I want to see them get away.
Tony Scott's like, I'm not doing it for mainstream appeal. I'm not doing it for sellout reasons. I'm doing it because I think that's what this movie needs. It's essentially a fairy tale, and the movie needs a fairy tale ending. They eventually compromised where Tony Scott said, look, I'll direct both endings. So the alternate ending is available on this Arrow Blu-ray, which I've seen. So there's the alternate ending, and then there's the theatrical ending, which is the more superior ending. And you know who agrees with that? Quentin Tarantino.
Now, I gotta say, I think Tony's ending is better.
The best way to view True Romance is viewing it as kind of Tarantino's teenage fantasy fairy tale. And to me, that's what makes the movie so much fun and awesome, and I love it. I have no complaints with this movie. I think it's just pure movie magic entertainment. It's awesome. So anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on True Romance. Tell me what you think about this movie. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Mention it in the comments below. Are you like me? Do you think it's one of Tarantino's best movies, or do you think it's kind of overrated? Let me know what your thoughts are, and as always, thank you guys for watching.